Hi there, Juleka here. Before we get started, I want to invite you, yes, you, to be a guest on the show. If you're an adult and a child of immigrants, and they could be from anywhere in the world, really, I'd love to talk to you about the conversations that are necessary but challenging, especially right about now. So whatever you're all getting into, I want to know about it. Politics, money, holidays, marriage, kids, everything. So send me an email directly at juleka@lantiguawilliams.com and we'll get you on the show. I can't wait to hear from you. Hi, everybody. Today I'm speaking with Carlos. He grew up in the suburbs of Miami. He was raised by a mom who worked really hard to provide for him in her adopted country. Carlos, of course, recognizes the many sacrifices she made for her family. But as an adult, he also sees the inequality in the U.S., inequality that makes it so hard for working-class individuals to move up economically. His mom doesn't see it quite that way. Let's get into it.
My name's Carlos, and I was born abroad but grew up in Miami. When I grew up, I used to call my mother Mama. I grew up in the suburbs. We did not grow up with a lot, actually. Mother raised us as a single mother, so that's already one income. And because she moved to the U.S. as an immigrant, I think the language barrier and the social network barrier meant that she had to do a lot of housekeeping and jobs that just didn't really provide a lot financially. We didn't have to worry about food, and we didn't have to worry about where we were going to sleep the next month at our power. But in the next phase of my life, where I started working in really distressed communities, those things were very salient. I mean, I worked with students who lived in trailer homes whose their roof was kind of like a blue tarp, kids who were perpetually hungry. I mean, I saw a little bit of everything, and I'm talking about children, but I also saw that in adults. From that perspective, I also saw where I had more opportunity and more access. That also made me hyper aware of my advantages, right? The attention that my mother gave to me and how hard she worked to put us in a very stable environment with, pretty good schools nearby, and how not everyone gets that. The range just runs really big in the US from the haves and the have-nots. It caused tension, especially when I was unemployed for a while. And that frustration was eating me up. The frustration of knowing that it's not your effort, it's not your merit. Oftentimes, I don't want to say it's the old cliche of who you know, but at the company I was in, for example, every person of color that came in on my cohort, a cohort of about, I don't know, 20 people, were the ones that left first, or were the ones that were fired first, myself included. I was trying to explain that to her. And for her, it's incongruent because for her, obviously, the U.S. has done quite a lot. And I think that created friction. That created friction. Part of it is that I was already upset. I was already upset to begin with. And what I wanted at that point was for one is sympathy of the situation and acknowledgement, kind of the you're not crazy, this is the way things are. But instead, I was getting a lot of what everyone else was telling me, which is just keep trying. Some people even told me, if I just made peace with God, things would work out. So part of why this is important, she takes it as a personal slight. I'm talking about systemic issues of access. She's talking about failures as a parent, and you view what I've given to you as a failure or as not enough. That's not what it is, mommy. What it is that there are several rules in this country based on the background you come from, based on the color of your skin, based on your gender, and your sexual identities. And those rules affect us deeply, and it impacts our success later in life. It impacts what we can do and we cannot do. Where areas, she's looking at it as some sort of statement on her parenting, which is not what I'm saying. I guess I was able to address a little bit of it with her through a field trip. I had an interesting field trip with my mother, and I think that changed her perspective a little bit. We had to go to Central Florida for something. I took a detour. We went to a town called Pahokee. We're not just talking about urban poverty. We're also talking about rural poverty, and it's all kind of wrapped up in one. And these are Black communities. It is, that's kind of the demographics of the region. There's $3 stores. There's no other place to find food, buildings that are condemned. You're really looking at people who don't have a lot at all. And I think for her, that was a bit of a mind shift because she's never seen that in her 20-year history, 25-year history in the United States. She's never seen a place like that before. It didn't necessarily resolve our views on wealth inequality and what that means and how that impacts opportunity. But I think it changed her mind to an extent. She still talks about it.
I wanted to explore this disconnect between first gens like Carlos and their parents. Many of us have a hard time understanding our parents' conservative political and economic views, especially in light of the fact that they're immigrants to this country. I definitely needed help with this one. So I called in an expert.
My name is Eduardo Gamarra. I'm a professor of politics and international relations at Florida International University. I've been at the university now for 35 years. My research at the university spans really most of Latin America. In terms of geographic focus, I've done a lot of work on the Andean region, the Caribbean, Central America, and on various topics, but mainly campaigns and elections. I began a consulting career doing research in the United States on Latino politics.
So you heard Carlos's story. What did you hear when you listened?
Well, it's an interesting story, and frankly, what I heard is a story that I've heard many, many, many times from my students. In fact, Carlos is very typical of the kind of students that we receive at FIU. Somebody who has whose mother worked her to the bone and put him in a position where he basically has middle class aspirations and is very analytical and is analytical about his situation here, but really reflects very little knowledge about where his mother came from. And that's always very interesting of immigrants, right? Especially second and third generation kids who see how their parents struggle, but don't really understand where their parents came from.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? About basically the gap in their analysis of their current situation, of their family situation, versus their lack of understanding of the situation from which their parents came?
Parents come from a variety of backgrounds. They may come as refugees fleeing violence or fleeing political persecution, or they may just simply come as economic immigrants. And when they arrive here, they really come with aspirations of very quick upward mobility, and then find themselves in very difficult situations because they have to work long hours and completely abandon the lifestyle that they may have had at home. The children appreciate what their parents do to a certain extent, but they're being socialized into the American dream. And so they go to school and they forget their Spanish, the little Spanish they knew, because instruction in school there is no Spanish instruction to speak of. There is no teaching of the history of Latin America or any of the countries where these kids come from, or very cursory kind of teaching, right? So what you have then are kids who grow up not learning about their past, with parents who are really too busy to educate them about where they came from, right?
So it seems like ideologically, once the first generation, once the child born and socialized in the US starts to gain consciousness, there's a split, right? There's a fork in the ideological road between the parent and the child. Can you talk about where the split begins to happen and what are the core values expressed by each of them, by each generation, as the fork gets wider and wider in the road?
What I see often, and I have the experience of 35 years of teaching children of immigrants, a lot of the parents who flee their home countries are conservative and have conservative values, and that the values that they try to inculcate at home get softened as generations pass on a number of things, on religious values, on tolerance issues, on things that the migrant parent back home might have found just absolutely unacceptable. For example, things like racial integration, things of course that relate to the way in which the United States has advanced on social issues, the whole issues ranging from sexual identity and so on, that today are common with young kids, but that older generations still find difficult to accept. So that tension is there.
It really struck me in Carlos's story that it took that sort of like winding detour through a predominantly Black, economically depressed area for his mother to have an awakening about the economic disparities and the racial disparities in her backyard. And so I'm wondering what you made of that story. And I wonder if you have heard similar stories in the many years that you've been teaching the children of immigrants.
Well, what's interesting, of course, is that Miami is a very, very, how should I put it? It camouflages poverty, and it camouflages poverty extraordinarily well. The city of Miami is one of the poorest in the United States, and you would not know that because the same people that live in those neighborhoods, right, the Opalocas, the Alapatas, and so on, they shop at Walmart, but they also shop at Target, and they also show up at Dadeland Mall, right? And they're able to kind of, how should I put it, I guess camouflage their own, socioeconomic status. And so there's this false sense here that we're all middle class, right? When what we see is that most of us are really only a paycheck away from destitution, right?
Well, so are most Americans.
So yeah, most Americans.
Most Americans don't have $400 for an emergency in their bank account.
Correct.
All right. So then, to borrow a political term, let me ask you about what you think the key talking points should be when a first gen starts to notice the differences, the ideological and point of view differences between themselves and their parents. What are some of the key talking points for them? And also, because you've identified that there's clearly a background gap, they don't know, they don't understand sufficiently what their parents came from. What is the type of information that they should be seeking from their parents?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, it's a thing that has to work itself out. On the one hand, it's the parent who needs to initiate the dialogue, right? You have to talk to them about where you came from. What was it like in my case in Bolivia? What was it like in Bolivia in the case of their mother? Look at, where it is that we live, how it is that we got here, and where we're going to go, right? Now, Carlos is an adult, and Carlos now has a responsibility not of trying to convert his mother into being more tolerant, but he has a responsibility to understand why his mother thinks the way she does. So his mother went to Central Florida or wherever it was that they witnessed that situation. Carlos needs to do the same. He needs to meet his mother and look at where his mother came from to understand her a little bit better.
And with that, I'm going to thank you so much for making time to talk to us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, let's recap what we learned from Eduardo. Be curious about their past. To better understand your parents' values and where their POV comes from, ask about their family history and their experiences in their home country. Take ownership of the conversation. There are many reasons for the gaps between our parents' lived experiences and what we know about them. But as adults, we can take the lead and start the conversations. And remember, strive to understand different contexts. As grown-up children socialized in the United States, we have a perspective that our parents may never share. But don't try to convince them to see things your way. Instead, listen with a caring ear and understand them better. Share your POV and allow them to alter their own perspectives at their own pace. Thank you so much for listening and sharing us. How to Talk to Mamí and Papí About Anything is an original production of Lantigua Williams & Co. Virginia Lora produced this episode. Michael Castañeda mixed it. Micaela Rodriguez is our founding producer and social media editor. Cedric Wilson is our lead producer. I'm the show's creator, Juleika Lantigua Williams. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Talk to Mamí Papi. Please subscribe and rate us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Bye, everybody. Same place next week.